Good evening, members. The House is resumed and we will pick up the debate on the Prime Minister's statement, and it is a split call for the Green Party. I call Celia Wade-Brown.
Tēnā koe te mangai o te whare, and I'd like to share my condolences with those who have lost loved ones, my admiration to the brave first responders and volunteers, and thanks to all those who are working to help communities recover from the extreme rainfall events. And thank you to the marae and others who have offered manaakitanga both to residents and to visitors, domestic and overseas. We must focus on all of the 4 R's of emergency management: reduction of risk, readiness, response, as well as recovery. I had a little look for the source of a little European whakatauki. Prevention is better than cure. And it was the Dutch philosopher Erasmus in the 16th century who is credited with saying prevention is better than cure. And it applies to landslides, but it also applies to healthcare, transport congestion, and much more. We didn't hear much about prevention in the Prime Minister's State of the Nation speech. After all, a healthy environment and a healthy population mean putting the common good above private profit. If more people in our cities are healthier because they walk or cycle more, that doesn't provide a profit, but it's great for the people. Clean, uncontaminated water to drink or to swim in without too much nitrate or bacteria is also great for people. But where's the private healthcare profit in that? There's a question that the Prime Minister did not consider in his State of the Nation speech. Who is the economy for? And I would add, as the spokesperson for democracy and electoral reform, who is democracy for? Is it for the wealthy and the sorted? Or is it the young worker shifting between rentals, the student on a friend's couch, the family who moved towns when the mills closed so they could find work? Our democracy only provides a mandate for government if most people participate. And right now, hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders are at risk of being locked out. The writ for the next election drops on October the 4th. Election day is November the 7th, and if you're not enrolled by midnight on October the 25th, you don't get a say. But if you want to change between the Māori roll and the general roll, the deadline is much sooner. Midnight, August the 6th. The Prime Minister talked about GDP growth and infrastructure, but he didn't talk about the most vulnerable people. Workers doing split shifts who barely have time between jobs to make a meal and sleep. These aren't people who don't care about democracy, they're people whose lives don't have the cushion of stability that makes enrolment and participation easy. If we make enrolment just a little bit harder, we're creating a system that privileges the already privileged. The people most affected by political decisions are often the people least able to participate in making them. The people most likely to be left off the roll often have the most at stake. That's young people who will face climate change, workers who need a living wage. So let me be clear about what needs to happen. If you're not enrolled, enroll now. Check your details, and if you know somebody who isn't enrolled, help them to enroll. It's a best response to the State of the Nation speech is to vote and to make this a one-term government.
Madam Speaker.
Honourable Julianne Genter.
Tēnā koe, Madam Speaker, tēnā koutou e te whare. There is a lot going on in the world right now. There's a lot going on here in Aotearoa. A lot to give us pause and worry, reasons to mourn. And there's also much to give us hope. We can see the communities forming that are going to enable our society, our people, to thrive in the future. I acknowledge, like my colleagues, the lives recently lost in the extreme weather events of last week in Mahurangi, Papamoa, Mount Maunganui, the families who are still grieving, and those whose homes or livelihoods have been affected. This is human-caused climate change. We knew about this decades ago. We knew there would be more floods, landslides, droughts, extreme heat. It affects ordinary people, it affects our food system, it affects global stability. It was already happening in many countries more than a decade ago. Back in 2014, I had the honor of attending the climate reality training, which was hosted by Al Gore in this part of the world, and we saw an extensive presentation demonstrating the link between greenhouse gas emissions from humans, burning fossil fuels, changing our land use, agriculture. We knew that what it would cause is a warming temperature, most of which has gone into the oceans, and that directly contributes to heavier rainfall events. It also perversely contributes to periods of drought. And we could already see that there were lives being lost in extreme flooding events. It just wasn't here in Aotearoa, not yet, but now it is. The dangerous political ideology is the one that says we should not speak the truth, that says it's just a matter of political opinion, that we don't need to act on or take climate action. It's ridiculous. John Key's national-led government signed up to the Paris Agreement. And now we just have empty words from this government who has gutted the Climate Change Act, has cut funding for both resilience and mitigation. That means they're actively pursuing an agenda that will increase dangerous fossil fuel emissions, that will increase agricultural emissions, at the same time as they took the funding that could have been used to make people's lives better, to make people's lives easier, to help prevent the challenges, and they gave that to people who already own the most. A tax break for tobacco companies, for landlords, and money for fossil fuel exploration. We have known for at least 5 years, at least, that we cannot have, the world cannot have any more exploration for fossil fuels. We cannot afford to burn them. We can't keep building motorways. It's ridiculous. We need a low carbon transport system. We need a low carbon food system. We need to live in harmony with nature. And that is what our communities want. Last night, I was speaking to a packed out meeting in my electorate in Rongotai, in Newtown. And there were at least 100 people there on a Tuesday night at short notice. And let me tell you, they want to change the government. They can see the global instability. They can see the rise of authoritarianism. And you know, in my home country, I gotta say, Madam Speaker, in a few weeks, I'll have my 20th anniversary of calling Aotearoa home. What a huge privilege I have to live in a small, beautiful country where democracy still functions. It's been nearly 25 years since I left the United States. And right now in the city my brother lives in, my brother and my sister-in-law, Minneapolis, St. Paul, there are armed thugs funded by the federal government killing civilians, killing citizens for standing up for peace. They are taking illegal action. In the United States, people never thought this would happen, and they think it can't happen here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But Madam Speaker, it can. It absolutely can, and that is why we have to protect our democracy. And as my colleague Celia Wade-Brown was saying, we need to protect democracy. Governments that change the rules around voting and make it harder for people to enroll and vote should not be trusted. We have enough time. We know what the election date is. It's the 7th of November. I can tell you the people of Rongotai are already engaging in community action to protect our taio, to protect our communities. And come November 7th, we will see a change.
Madam Speaker.
Grant McCullum.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start off in response to the Prime Minister's statement just to acknowledge the awful outcome of the events, and particularly in Tauranga and Papamoa and Maharangi. And I know there's a person missing over on the East Coast too. It's terrible, and my heart goes out to those families. But I particularly want to talk to what's happened in my electorate in Northland and the rainfall that happened in the early hours of Sunday the 18th. And I have here a graph which some of you may find interesting. You'll see there's a big skyscraper there, and that covers 6 hours. And that covers the rainfall which happened per hour. For the first hour there was 40 millimetres of rain. The second hour 35 millimetres, then 80, followed by 80, followed by 35, 15 and 5. That's 290 millimetres of rain in the space of 6 hours, which is 3 times the monthly rainfall for January in that area. And that just showed the level of the actual amount of the devastation that was then, it then led to a huge devastation. No soil structures or catchments can cope with that sort of rainfall in that short period of time. And it certainly had a massive impact. In an area I know very well, around the Whangaruru Harbour, Bland Bay and Oakra, holidayed there since I was a teenager, had a lot of fun in Bland Bay, fishing and then water skiing, and Oakra with the family, so I know the area very well. And what was the impact of that rainfall, that first event, the one that, not the one that happened around the rest of the country, but that very first event, was a massive slip at the back of the Oakra Hall. A hall, ironically, in the last election campaign, both myself and David Seymour ended up doing an election event, which in a little community of a few hundred people was actually quite something. But the slip came down right into the back of the hall, and devastated the local community. That was their hub. That was their place, and it devastated it. There are 5 houses red stickered in the white area and 10 yellow stickered. And then there was the area in Helena Bay, which was in the real catchment, which was at the bottom end of the catchment where a lot of the rain fell. And the devastation caused from the flooding was something else. Came up a metre and a half or so, and there was some very temporary housing. And one of the local fathers rescued a couple of young kids out of a particular house and got them out. Otherwise, we could have had a much different result. That was the actual devastation that was caused. That was the suddenness of it all. No one forecast anything like that. It just wasn't forecast. And I want to thank at this point, because what we saw from that, as all this happened, the local marae at Mulkau Marae in that Helena Bay area, after Gabrielle, they learnt some lessons, like a lot of the country did. They were set up with an emergency container. They had solar panels and batteries, and so they were the hub. They had the kitchen and everything there lined up. And so people gathered there, and it was thankfully, it was built on a raised area above the area of the floods. And consequently, people were safe, and they were looked after. And there was communications, even though the power went out. So, but in particular, there was a lot of people that showed good leadership in setting all that up. Simon Mitchell, the CE for Ngāti Wai, Rapata Diamond, a trustee, and Apihirama Edwards was another senior member of the Ngāti Wai community that showed great leadership. And it was great to see. So on the Sunday morning, I contacted Ken Cooper, good friend of mine, the new mayor of Whangarei, shot up and was briefed on what was happening. Because when you're the local MP, you feel connected and you want to be part, you want to go and help your people, see if there's anything you can do. But you don't want to get in the way. It's always that fine line as a local MP, because there are experts there who lead civil defence and they know what they're doing. They don't need some know-it-all turning up thinking they know what to do when they actually know nothing. So it was great to see them in action. They did a great job. So the next day they declared a state of emergency. Also, bearing in mind there was another rain system coming. And another 175 mils came on the Wednesday. And that's when the big slip hit the Helena Bay Hill Road, which is now going to take 3 or 4 months to clear. And the downstream effects of that for the community is quite substantial, really substantial. I'll come to that in a minute. But I think it's important at this point to acknowledge all the people that did great work over this week, and it's still, this particular area still has a localised state of emergency through till February the 4th. Or 3rd, I think it is. And I'd like to acknowledge all the people in civil defence. They are something else to watch. They're great people. The fire and emergency, the council staff, rapid response teams. And I really want to also acknowledge the leadership shown by our Prime Minister and our Minister, Mark Mitchell. Mark's been up there twice, and the Prime Minister flew in and he took myself in and a range of other officials on Saturday. And Dr. Shane Retty was also involved. And we went and visited, and the community was really very pleased to see, because we sent the message we cared about their community and we're there to help. I wanted to understand what their needs were, and we were there to listen. I particularly want to acknowledge also one of my parliamentary colleagues, Huhana Linden. She's done a great job up there, because her marae is out around the Bland Bay area there, and she's done a great job supporting her community and keeping people informed. And the other mayor for the far north, the acting mayor at the time, Chicky Rudkins, because Moku was having a holiday, as he said to me, Grant, I picked the 1 week of the year when it had to bucket down. So, but he was told to stay on holiday. Things were under control in his area. So, I also want to really thank the contractors. They're a group of people that honestly, when the roads are all closed, there's slips everywhere. Suddenly, people they just want the roads cleared. That's what they want, to be able to get out, want to go places, but so they can carry on with their lives. I want to acknowledge the contractors who do a great job and thank them very much for their efforts. So I spent a bit of time on the Friday after all this happened, driving down from Paihia down the old Russell Road. I dropped in to the Waikiri Marae, drove out to Bland Bay and checked out the Naitonga Bridge. When the guy said to me, because the approaches have been washed away, and he said, I'll be a week to fix this. They fixed it in 2 days. They got stuck in, worked non-stop and fixed it in 2 days. Thank you to those people. I really do. I'd like to acknowledge the people of the people and managers of the Elliott Bay Campground. Steve and Ursula did a great job. As they saw that, they initially could see the weather was changing on the Saturday night before the big rainfall, and actually told their people who are resident there for camping, stick all your valuables and stuff you want to keep dry in your vehicles. I just got a bad feeling about this. Sure enough, that night they're all in the woolshed, sheltering. So that was a good foresight, and they all got out the next day without any trouble. A couple of things that the other damage talk about. There have been 62 slips cleared so far. 90 people have been displaced from homes, and announced today, and I acknowledge my colleague Tama Potaka, who's actually arranged for emergency camper vans to be sent up. They'll have to negotiate a pretty dodgy road to get there, but there's 10 camper vans on the way, which is great. So it means we're improving the accommodation, and whatever else is required will be supplied. The government's also supplied $1 million to the reimbursed marae for their expenses, and also $1.2 million for the mayoral funds, and $200,000 for Rural Support Trust. And the thing with the roading, remember that in over the 3-year period, there's $700 million allocated for emergency roadworks. So that's great to see, amongst other things. I just want to quickly highlight one final thing. One of the things that challenges you get in these situations is the kids that have to go to school. School's about to start, and unfortunately, most of the kids who want to go to secondary school, the road they use has now got a big slip on it. So I was really very pleased that the Ministry of Education, and I'll pay credit here to the Minister who's sitting beside me here, the Helena, what they've done is they've set up a hub at Whangaruru School, which has a capacity for an extra 30 students. And the students will have the option to be dual enrolled between Whangaruru School and their original schools in Whangarei. The teacher aides are being provided on site to offer additional support. Secondary students will continue to access specialist support through online learning. And the council, because the council's advised this could take 3 or 4 months. So that's the sort of those are the sorts of challenges that these isolated communities are dealing with. And I want to really acknowledge that and thank them for it. And I just want to also finally acknowledge there's a forestry business there that have been really hurt. They're stuck on the wrong side of the slip trying to harvest a forest. It's costing them 50 grand a week. We're trying to sort things out because road access is challenging. And so I commend the speech and I acknowledge the people of Oakra in the north. Thank you.
Simon Court.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I want to talk about one thing that underpins almost every frustration New Zealanders feel right now. The cost of housing and the time it takes to get infrastructure built. The cost of living that keeps rising. The simple reason behind it all, it is too hard to build and too hard to grow business in New Zealand. The problem didn't happen by accident. It lies at the feet of the failed RMA. New Zealand does not lack land. We're not Singapore. We're not Hong Kong. We have a massive amount of land that we could develop. And yet the real problem is the lack of land that we can develop, serviced by infrastructure. That scarcity is artificial. For 3 decades, the RMA allowed councils to ration land supply by failing to zone for enough growth and by treating almost every objection from any Tom, Dick and Harriet as a legitimate objection. The result's been predictable. When land prices rise, house prices rise. And when housing costs explode, the cost of living across the country follows. Good planning does not require scarcity, however. It requires instead choice, competition, and of course, flexibility. The RMA delivered none of those. And that is why the new planning bill that this government introduced in December 2025 really does matter. Right at the top, the bill embeds a goal that's been missing from New Zealand's planning law for far too long. Competitive urban land markets. They require just 2 things. Enough land being zoned so councils are not monopolies deciding who gets to build where and when. And they also rely on flexible land release over time so that supply can respond to demand for housing. The planning bill recognises a basic truth. Councils need plans to prepare for infrastructure and services, but they cannot accurately determine or predict everywhere that the market demands growth. They cannot know exactly where people will want to build in any given year or in 10 or even 20 years' time. So the planning bill will make sure that in the future, councils not only zone abundant development capacity, but enable the flexibility to release land when there is demand for growth beyond that capacity. That is how we confront this artificial land scarcity, make land available, more competition, get more homes built where people want to live. But land supply alone does not solve the problem because land must be serviced. Zoning signals intent where a council thinks that people should live, and of course with natural hazards front and centre right now with the disaster in Mount Maunganui and flooding and slips all around the country, planning and zoning also indicates where people shouldn't build. But infrastructure delivers the reality of this capacity. And under the RMA, infrastructure delivery has been strangled, consents are slow, processes are expensive. The Infrastructure Commission estimates $1.3 billion per annum spent just on consenting alone. And the objections and the objectors are limitless, whether it's a McDonald's in Wanaka or a wind farm in Southland. There are no shortage of people who will turn up to say no to the things that New Zealanders need. And that money, Dr. Duncan Webb, spent on infrastructure consenting is money that doesn't get spent building roads, pipes or power lines. It's money burnt in a fire of delay, duplication, and one of the biggest contributors to this is the RMA allowing people to weaponise any number of effects to obstruct development. One of the craziest illustrations of this is the concept of reverse sensitivity. That existing operations that might have operated, whether it's a factory, people move next door and then complain about the noise or the impacts of the very thing that preceded them. My colleague, Minister Nicole McKee, has spoken about people moving next to long-standing gun ranges, then objecting to their continued operation. We see the same thing with airports. We see the same thing with quarries. Who knew that living next to an airport might be noisy and planes might fly over your house, but people will still object to it? And what do they expect? The airport to move? Well, that's ridiculous. So is it any wonder that with such a system, infrastructure is so hard and so expensive to build? Now, the planning bill, alongside wider reforms, will fix this. Infrastructure is not going to be an afterthought in the new system. It's embedded as a core goal right at the top of the planning bill. It will be supported by a far narrower scope of legislation. Regulation that means there will be fewer things that people can have the right to object to. It'll be supported by forcing public input where it belongs, at the national direction and plan-making stage, not in people's and businesses' individual consent processes where they are not genuinely affected. And that really matters because consenting is about delivery, not debate. The planning bill will also support those dealing with reverse sensitivity. Under the new legislation, you will not be able to move to the nuisance and then complain about it. Existing operations deserve that certainty. It will also be supported by long-term spatial planning. This will identify strategic infrastructure corridors well in advance. It will provide one of the pathways for simplified infrastructure designation processes. The result is simple: land that is zoned, land that is serviced, land that can actually deliver growth. So what are the values behind this reform? Well, this reflects a planning system that in future will be grounded in property rights and common sense. Property rights for people who already live and invest in the places where they live. Property rights for millions of New Zealanders who will benefit from future growth and housing opportunities. This reform will reduce the monopoly that councils have over development and enable private developers, the private sector, to respond to demand rather than begging permission from these monopoly regulators that councils have become. And we will replace a culture of scarcity with instead a culture of building and abundance. That is how you truly fix what matters. Because when homes are built, people have access to affordable housing, and when infrastructure is delivered, productivity rises. When the system works, the cost of living eases. So if this government is serious about affordability, opportunity and growth, then planning reform is not optional for us. The planning bill is how we move from a system designed to say no to one that automatically says yes and. Yes to homes, yes to infrastructure, yes to a future where New Zealanders can afford to live in the country they were born in. ACT is proud to be in the engine room for this change. I support the Prime Minister's statement. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
This is a split call.
Thank you, Madam
Scott
Speaker.
Willis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And let's talk about the state of the nation, because it's been a chilly summer in the deep south. We've had plenty of rain, heavy rain events. Our summer's been so cold and wet, we've been lighting the fire, dipping into our winter firewood supply. And gosh, I think we're so lucky lucky that we can afford to do that, because the state of our nation is that so many are not so lucky. Many hard-working Kiwis are having to do without right now. Kiwis all around the motu are doing it tough, and you'll have to excuse me, Madam Speaker, but I thought Christopher Luxon must have been joking when he claimed that the government is supporting New Zealanders' financial security. It's a joke, because for struggling Kiwis, power prices rose 12% in the last 12 months, and this rising cost of electricity is one of the biggest drivers of the cost of living crisis. This is of the government's own making. Our rising electricity prices are one of the biggest drivers of inflation, and yet, in the State of the Nation speech from our Prime Minister, silence. Christopher Luxon talks prosperity. Meanwhile, people are unable to pay their power bills, and manufacturing is shutting down, meaning more people out of work, more people doing it tough. I don't know when it will dawn on the Prime Minister that our regions are hurting. The PM told us it's going to be a great year, and perhaps it will be for him, because in his own words, he's wealthy, he's sorted. But tough cookies for ordinary Kiwis who have lost their jobs or are elderly who can't afford their bills, thanks to the choices this government has made and continues to make. No, Madam Speaker, the prosperity Christopher Luxon is talking about only rings true for those fossil fuel companies who are getting a $200 million subsidy. Those poor offshore fossil fuel companies needing a handout, and imagine choosing that instead of putting solar panel arrays on every school in Aotearoa. How short-sighted is that? And then we hear Christopher Luxon arguing that the changes to national direction will allow greater development of renewable energy, assuming the market will simply deliver. Well, we've had 30 years of the market failing to deliver. What we actually need is to break up the gentailers, because people are being crippled by high power bills while innovation is being cut off at the knees. But the government wants to fund tax breaks to landlords and their big tobacco mates. That's what the government's focus seems to be. Keep the dividends coming, we've got to pay for our mates. It is time to break up the gentailers, the supermarket, the Australian bank cartels. They have had their boot on the throat of the average Kiwi household with the government's complicity for far too long. And come November the 7th, Kiwis will have an opportunity to say they have had enough. Madam Speaker, it is time to invest in an energy system for the public good, to support our households, to support our businesses, to support manufacturing, to support industry, and free ourselves from the tyranny of fossil fuels and the fossil fools who sit in this House. We can unlock real solutions to cut power prices. We can build resilience, and we can decarbonise with appropriate rules, regulations, standards and policies that are fit for the future. We need to design an energy system that is fit for the 21st century, not something for last century. Kiwis know that the way to secure that future is through a Green-led government. And Madam Speaker, we are ready.
Madam Speaker.
Mike Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak to the Prime Minister's statement, and I just acknowledge my colleague Scott Willis for an inspirational 5-minute speech there. As for what we heard yesterday from the Prime Minister, it was simply a load of corporate spin. When we all know that this country has gone backwards over the last 2 years. Nature has been under attack. Māori have been under attack. It's got harder for everyday Kiwi, not easier. The less you earn, the harder it gets. On the flip side, the wealthy are doing just fine. and the only thing that this government has been able to grow is inequality. And they blame everyone else for their failings, like local government. This government seems to love using local government as a punching bag and an easy distraction from the increased responsibilities that they put on councils without the support and resourcing needed. So they've introduced a suite of changes that they believe will fix local government, to make them refocus on what this government thinks are the core services of roading, rubbish and reticulation, to get them back to the so-called basics. They're going to introduce a rates cap. They're going to remove regional councillors and limit what councils can spend money on. What they're not doing is talking to the sector in good faith, because of course this government think they know best. Everyone that I have spoken to agrees that local government is not fit for purpose and changes are required. Local Government New Zealand, who knows the sector best, agree and have already done a lot of work and produced a thorough and thoughtful report that this government has dismissed out of hand. However, when you ignore the sector and just blindly create a pathway based on your own reckons, you are bound to fail. You fail councils, you fail residents, and you fail to make the changes that would endure and make a real difference. Let's talk about getting back to the basics. It's back to the 80s. Roads, reticulation and rubbish. I'll tell you what's rubbish. It's thinking that the role of government is just roads, reticulation and rubbish. Local government is there for the people, for the community and the volunteer groups that do so much mahi. Local government is there for the environment, climate mitigation and adaptation. Local government is there for the local economy and mana whenua. Local government is there for future generations. Local councils are on the ground every day for the well-being of their residents. And if it's not local government, then who? Certainly not this government. No mayor or councillor wants to lift rates higher than they need to be. But when councils keep rates increases below what is required to meet the needs of their communities, towns or cities, then they start to sweat the assets until they start to break and water pipes start to burst. All you will do is push the burden and extra costs of delaying renewals to future councils, future ratepayers and increased costs. All you will do is hurt community more and of course nature will suffer. Ask councils what most expenditure goes on when they lift rates. I guarantee you they will tell you it's infrastructure. In the 3 years following the height of the pandemic, the cost of building roads, replacing pipes and bridges rose nearly 30%. That's not measured by CPI. And using the CPI as a measure of rates appropriateness is deliberately disingenuous. Councils will tell you that increased insurance and inflation is impacting rates, and the constant flip-flopping of governments causing plan change after plan change is costing councils millions and millions and affecting rates. What is not a big driver of rates increases is supporting community groups in their district. And it's community groups across the motu who are there when disaster hits, who are praised by politicians, who then don't think that they're supporting them ahead of time is important. Introducing a 2 to 4% rates cap will set up councils and communities that they represent to fail. And this government wants to simplify local government. Firstly, by removing regional councillors and replacing them with a board of mayors, creates unnecessary risk. These mayors have been elected by their community to serve their community, not the region. Do they actually have the time to do this additional role beside their mayoral duties? And do they have the skill sets to perform the role of a regional councillor? Once again, it will be our environment that suffers. And I'm appalled that this government will achieve their goal of removing Ngāi Tahu councillors from the Canterbury Regional Council. This might surprise the government, but having 2 mana whenua representatives among 16 councillors has made them better governors for the region.
Members' time has expired.
Yeah.
Honourable Erica Stanford.
I move that this debate be now adjourned.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. The debate is adjourned and is set down for resumption next sitting day. I call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Interrupted debate on the second reading of the Legislation Amendment Bill.
Madam Speaker.
Just a minute while I get myself here, so we don't have a legislative. The legislative amendment bill, we were up to, in the interrupted debate, we were up to call 12, which is National Party call Ryan Hamilton.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, I'd just like to acknowledge the mover of this bill, the Honourable Judith Collins, who had a lot to do with, well, this bill's actually gone through many iterations in many parliaments, and obviously it's largely a bipartisan bill, being secondary legislation. I do confess to not knowing a lot about secondary legislation before coming into Parliament, and now I can't get it out of my head. But the fantastic thing about this bill, Madam Speaker, is it brings it all into one place. It indexes it, it houses it, and it's a wonderful thing, so I'm pleased to commend it to the House.